Okay, connected quickly today. That's a change. So we're on, and I'm going to start in 3 minutes. Greetings, everyone. We've got our usual international crew. I hope everyone's well. The weather here looks like it might rain, which is really badly needed. We've been having a real drought, a lot of fires. Yankee Apple, have there been fires in Michigan? Canmore says the smoke has cleared. Last few days, yeah, there's been fires all over the place. Finland's the same here, so I guess they've been getting it too. No, we've been really dry. Actually, the last winter was dry. We didn't get much snow. So almost ready to start. Just wait till the clock ticks over to 6 o'clock, and then we'll begin.
It's 6 o'clock.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So this evening I'm going to conclude this short series on Buddhism and science by talking about the view of the universe, or the cosmological vision, narrowly defined as the nature of the universe, and comparing it to the modern scientific view, and also as a secondary comparison to the pre-modern European view. And this is something I have found very interesting, that these three different views of the universe, the ancient Indian or Buddhist view, the medieval European view, and the modern scientific view, the odd man out is the pre-modern European model. It's not to say that the ancient Indian model agrees with the modern scientific model in detail. It does not, but there are some important points, conceptual points, that bring them close together. And I'll expand on this, but the short version is that in the pre-modern or medieval European view, the abode of human beings is at the center, and it's the most important place is the earth at the center, which is the abode of humanity. And the second point is that the universe is very limited in scope, in both spatial terms and in temporal terms. Whereas in the Indian view and in the modern view, the abode of human beings is in an obscure corner. It's not at the center. And the overall dimensions are vast, if not infinite, both in terms of space and time. So to look at the details now, let's start with the medieval European view, because it's the odd man out, and it's basically what everyone in the West thought of the world up until at least 1500, and in most cases somewhat longer. It's a view that was developed continually over time, beginning with the ancient Greeks. The Earth is seen as a sphere. Now, this was known to the ancient Greeks, and actually to most civilizations came to this conclusion. There's some obvious observations that can confirm this. So probably most of you know this, but the sort of popular trope about Columbus proving the world was round is ridiculous. Every educated person in Europe knew the world was round in Columbus's time. That's not what he was about. So the Earth is at the center, and around the Earth are successive spheres, crystalline spheres, in which the planets are embedded. And this includes the sun and the moon, Venus, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and then a final sphere for the fixed stars. And these spheres rotate around the Earth. The Earth doesn't move. The whole ensemble is the entire universe. That's all there is to it. There's nothing outside of the last sphere. And it was calculated in the Middle Ages that the dimensions of this were calculated, and it would roughly fit into the modern estimate for the orbit of Jupiter. So considering that's the entire universe, that's quite small relative to how we now perceive the universe. This was not a naive view by any means. It became quite complex because it was based on observation, and as observation was found not to agree with the theory was continually modified. A major modification was the addition of epicycles, which was an idea that the planets not only rode on these crystalline spheres, but there were smaller spheres that rode on the large spheres, and the planets were seated on those. So they did a kind of loopy movement. And there were also other mathematical kludges added over time. And the system became so complex because it was based on observation, and they kept tinkering with it to make it more accurate. It became so complex by the end of the 15th century that Portuguese King Alfonso who was studying astronomy out of interest, he remarked to one of his tutors that if I had been present at the creation, I could have advised the Almighty to make the whole scheme a little simpler. But it worked. Well, as complex as it was, it worked. You could meet it, and it worked quite well. Then the first change from that towards the modern view came with Copernicus, who proposed that the sun was at the center of the universe, and everything revolved around the sun, including the earth. Now, this seems closer to our modern conception, but it didn't catch on right away. There was a lot of resistance to it. And the resistance was not entirely based on religious obscurantism, although there was some of that, but because his scheme did not work as well. It didn't agree with observation as well as the Ptolemaic model, the model with the crystalline spheres. There was a compromise version that was developed by an astronomer called Tycho Brahe, a very oddball character, who proposed that the Earth was at the center and the sun moved around the Earth, and the rest of the planets, including the moon, rotated around the sun. And this model worked actually quite well, and it was the official model of the Catholic Church for about 100 years. Tycho Brahe was a really odd character. He had a copper nose because he had lost his nose in a duel. It was cut off, and they had it replaced with a copper nose. And the King of Sweden was his patron. And built him a observatory in Sweden that they called Uraniborg, the city of the stars, and it was like a castle. And he staffed he had by this time, the king was lavishly supporting him, and he had a staff of servants, and he hired all dwarfs to be his servants in this castle for some reason. Anyhow, this model was still not perfect. It was actually better than either of the previous models. It was the Johannes Kepler who was the genius who broke through made the intuitive leap that no one else had made, that the planets did not move in circles, but in ellipses. And then everything just clicked into place. This was a mistake that everybody had made. They assumed that anything in the heavens had to be perfect, and the perfect shape is the circle. So, and none of the models agreed with observation perfectly, because they were all trying to make it work with circles. But Kepler observed and figured out mathematically that it could work better with ellipses. And it was only after his time that the heliocentric or sun-centered model became dominant and secure. And it was sometime later that astronomers figured out that the stars were actually suns equivalent to our sun. And it was only in the 1930s, that late, that it was determined that there are many galaxies, that this is only one galaxy amongst a very large, possibly infinite number. And then we now have the modern cosmological system, which sees the universe as composed as a very large number of galaxies, which are congeries of stars, and every galaxy has millions of stars. And the stars have planets, and we now have enough observations of nearby stars with space telescopes that we realize that planetary systems around stars are very common. So we have multiple worlds arranged in galaxies, and the age of the universe is seen as very, measured in billions of years, very long. Whereas in the medieval model, the age of the universe was thought to be 6,000 years. So now, we have the Western view and its evolution and up to the modern time. Let's turn back and look at the ancient Indian Buddhist model. Now, this was the Buddhist cosmology was one variation of a common theme that we have in pre-Buddhist sources and later in Jain and later Hindu sources, that variations of the same model, which differ somewhat in details but have the same basic principle. And the Indian mindset was quite different than the Greek. The Greeks were extroverts. The Indians were more introverted. So the Greeks looked at the universe and they tried to make a model that fit with observation, whereas the Indians' model does not work well at all with observation of actual stars and planets and the sky. It was a entirely mind-made exercise to provide a scheme to account for levels of consciousness. So it was inward looking and taking that inward vision and extrapolating it outwards to the universe. The central idea of this was multiple world systems extended to infinity, and each individual world system, what in Pali is called the Chakrawala, is centered not on the sun, not on the earth, but on a gigantic mountain, Mount Sinaru, or in Sanskrit, Sumeru, that is 84,000 yojanas high. So this is a massive mountain. If you convert that to miles or kilometers, it's actually higher than the modern calculation of the distance to the moon. So it's huge and massive. It's a pyramidal shape, this giant mountain, which is the center of the world. And the gods, the Tawatingsa gods, live on the summit. And around the mountain are concentric seas separated by rings of mountains. And outside of the 7 rings of mountains and seas is a vast ocean in which are 4 relatively small islands. The islands are about 10,000 yojanas in diameter. So in terms of the whole system, they're tiny. And human beings live on one of them, on the southern island of Jambudipa, and actually only on half of it, the bottom half of it, southern half. So the humans are in a a minor corner of the world system. So they're not given center stage as they were in the European model. And space is also conceived of as vast. There's an infinite number of these world systems. And time scale is also vast. There is no ultimate beginning and no ultimate ending to the universe. It's without a beginning, without an end. Each individual world system comes and goes. It has a lifespan, but that is also considered really vast. It's not enumerated in terms of years, but the Buddha said it's, when he was asked how long is a kappa, which is a world age, he said it cannot be reckoned in years or thousands of years, but here's a metaphor for you. If there was a block of granite, a yojana on a side, a cube, and the yojana is about 12 kilometers. If there was a block of granite 12 kilometers on a side, and a sparrow flew by once every 100 years and brushed it with its tail feathers, that block of granite would be totally worn away before the end of the kappa. The sun and the moon rotate around Sinnaru. And there is actually very little mention of stars or planets. They're not well explained. So the Indian model was not based on observation. This is quite obvious, because the movements of the sun and the moon are not at all well accounted for by an orbit around this hypothetical mountain. It would seem that by observation that the system could be easily refuted, but it didn't seem to bother the ancient Indian mind. The system was elegant and beautiful, and accounted for the abodes of various other beings besides humans, devas and nagas and yakas, asuras, and so on. So it was quite well accepted. There were, after the Buddhist time, there developed astronomical schools in India that developed models that were close to the Ptolemaic. But this religiously based model persisted for a long time, even into early modern times in Buddhist countries. There's a story that I come across about in Japan. When modern scientific ideas started to penetrate into Japanese culture, a man wrote a book trying to defend the Sinnaru-based model of the universe, and accommodate it to observational realities, which is must have been quite a intellectual feat. And he took this book to his Zen master, and the Zen master flipped through it and asked him, "What's this about?" And he told him, and the Zen master threw it back at him and said, "You blockhead, the point is to make an end of samsara, not to save it." So the movement away from a literal belief in this model did not caused a little bit of a intellectual crisis of faith in Buddhist countries, but not anywhere near the crisis that occurred in Europe with the Copernican model and Galileo being banned by the church and Guido Bruni being burned alive. This was it was a much bigger wrench for the Christians than it was for the Buddhists to accept modern cosmology. I think a large part of this was because of those 2 points in which ancient Buddhist view and modern view agree, which are really important conceptual points, that humans are not at the center and that the universe is vast, if not infinite. We do have to be careful not to press the comparison between the ancient and modern models too far. The world systems and the solar systems, the Indian and modern conceptions, they have what I would call a functional similarity, but not a structural one, meaning that both systems, there are multiple worlds inhabited by beings, or at least hypothetically, but they're quite different structurally. In the modern version, the multiple worlds are planets orbiting stars spread out 3-dimensionally in space. In the ancient Indian version, the multiple worlds are never associated with the stars. They're separate Chakawalas, each with a Mount Sinaru, and the whole basic scheme is repeated ad infinitum in all these different worlds. And they're not spread out 3-dimensionally, but 2-dimensionally. It's like a vast plane with these world systems laid out in on this flat plane that extends to infinity. So we can't press the comparison too far. But the way it affects the psyche of people who live in these systems, I can see how the change from the medieval European system to the modern one was such a psychic wrench, because it was a degrading or a diminution of human importance, that human beings felt themselves to be the center of the universe and the center of creation, and the special creation of God living in the center of the universe. And the abode was of humans situated within the greater universe was still enclosed. It was a relatively small, contained world. Whereas in the modern view, the boundaries were smashed. The universe is now seen as vast, and there's many galaxies, and each galaxy is millions of worlds. And human beings are living on a one planet around a middling, mediocre star on the outer fringe of one of these galaxies, far from the center of anything. So this was a major psychic change, whereas the Buddhist worldview can easily accommodate itself to modern scientific conceptions of the universe. It's not such a wrench at all. The structural scheme has changed, but the basic principles and underlying ethos of the model remains intact. And it doesn't, and perhaps more importantly, the change to a modern scientific model does not touch the core Buddhist principles, such as the Four Noble Truths, dependent origination, and so on. Now, these are not affected at all by the change to a scientific modern model. They're easily accommodated to it without any sort of contradiction. Whereas the medieval Christian view that the world was this earth was a special creation of God, and it had a limited lifespan as part of a story, you know, an eschatology, to use a theological term, that had a creation, a historical development, a incarnation of God as human in Jesus Christ, and then the end of the world and a final resolution, all in a relatively short span of 6,000 years. And to take that, to completely blow that away with an infinite universe, this earth is no longer just one special creation. Human beings are not that unique and special. And the story is much vaster than just the 6,000 year fixed eschatology of beginning, history, and end. When the Indians saw the universe as being cyclical, they saw time as being cyclical. You know, so that, you know, this is very compatible. The idea of cyclical time is very compatible with the idea of samsara. Samsara means wandering around. Samsareti is the verb, meaning to wander in circles, wander pointlessly or aimlessly. Whereas in the Western, or particularly, this is even pre-Christian, but became, you know, much more clarified in the Christian vision, that the universe has a teleology. It has a beginning and a fixed development, and then an ending. So it's a fixed story that has a point to it, and it's not repetitive. There's no cycle. So that's not a vision that's compatible with the idea of samsara. And there's no problem to conceptually move into a modern cosmology to accept the idea of samsara, or even of cyclical time. There are some modern cosmological models that are cyclical. One of the debates in modern science that's not settled is the ultimate fate of the universe. And one of the points of contention is, what is the total mass of the universe? If the mass is less than a certain number, a certain fixed amount, then the gravitational forces will not be enough to stop the expansion of the universe, and the universe will eventually peter out in what they call a heat death. It will just diffuse. If the mass is greater than that, then the gravitational forces at some time will reverse the expansion, and all the matter in the universe will contract again to a point, as it originated from a point at the Big Bang. It will retreat to that same point and experience what they call a big crunch, which will possibly be followed by a subsequent Big Bang and a repeat of the whole thing. So that's actually very close to some of the ancient Indian views. There was a pre-Buddhist view, you know, that still, you know, persisted into modern Hinduism, of the universe as the in-breath and out-breath of Brahma. And there's a version of this with in the Buddhist, they don't call it the in-breath and out-breath of Brahma, but they talk about the cycles of the universe expanding and contracting, or literally unfolding and infolding. Cycles that are repeated endlessly. This cyclical view of time that was opposed to the linear view in the West really permeated Indian culture. And this is one reason why, or probably the principal reason why ancient India, the history of ancient India is so obscure, and we don't really have good fixed dates for anything. Even the dates of the Buddha's life are open to scholarly dispute. No one's really sure exactly when the Buddha was born or died. The first certain date we have in Indian history that's beyond controversy is the invasion of Alexander of Macedon. We have that from Greek sources. This is because the ancient Indians, although they were mathematically sophisticated, they had a very advanced philosophy and a sophisticated medicine and other sciences and technologies. The one thing they never developed was had an interest in was chronology, because they didn't see history as important. It was just cycles, things happening. Kings come and go, empires rise and fall. So what? It's just endlessly repeating the same theme with variations. Whereas in the West, there was a view beginning with the Greeks and continued with the Christians. There was the view of history as having a direction and a purpose and a development, and it was linear. It was going somewhere. It was doing something. So it was important. So the Greeks developed the writing of history and the keeping of chronologies and dates, whereas it was something that never really interested the Indian mind. And this comes from a view of time as either linear or cyclical. So I think I've pretty well run out of things to say on this topic, and we'll see if there's anything comes up in the chat. Any questions? I'll continue and deal with those. Okay, we got one from Yankee Apple. The Indian world system as a mountain and the Norse pagan world system as a tree, Yggdrasil, seem very similar. Could they have a common origin? Yes, I think they do. The Indians, the Persians, the Norse, and the Greeks all had an ancient root in their culture, and particularly in their mythologies and their stories of the gods and the world, because they all sprung from the ancient Aryan stock that spread over Eurasia. So we can find quite a lot of parallels. Is it legitimate to conceive that Buddha Dhamma may arise sooner or later wherever sentient intelligent life exists in the universe as we now understand it? I think that's a pretty likely scenario, that there is some actually support for that in the Buddhist scriptures, that Buddhas can arise in other world systems. Probably a pretty rare development, but I don't see any reason why there wouldn't be a possibility of a Buddha arising on another planet. What is the name of the tree that is said to grow at the summit of Mount Meru? That is, I can remember, the Parichataka tree. That the that's in the city of the gods. Something about like Evgeny. I'm trying to read your Cyrillic here. I see Toronto and Russia. What's that first one? Privet. Privet is Toronto, Russia. I don't know. I'm not sure what that means. Could the view that history is going somewhere be considered wrong view? Yeah, I suppose in the broadest sense, it is a ditty. Would be a Mitra ditty. Quite a lot of words in common between Old Persian and Pali as well. Yes, yeah. Well, Old Persian Avestan is very close to Sanskrit. They're two of the very early expressions of the Aryans. Oh, it's hello. Okay. Buddhism as a sort of cosmic language or metathesis universalist of sorts. Yeah. Well, the wherever Buddha Dhamma arises in the universe, it would have to have the same principles. Do you think the observable universe is the whole samsara? No, because we really only observe part of reality. When matter is created during Big Bang, from Buddhist perspective, you think it happens after Brahma realms is ascending lower and lower, as in Agana Sutta. Well, that in a way is kind of mixing up two things, because the Aganya Sutta is talking about the origin of a single world system, and the Big Bang is talking about the origin of the whole universe. So it's really comparing apples and oranges. It's not really the same thing. Dante, this is generally a verboten area, nevertheless very remarkable. How do you think mind manifesting psychedelic chemicals act the way they do? Sometimes people report a sense of ego death, which seems weirdly close to anatta. Sometimes there are reports of seeing emptiness of phenomena similar to sunyata. Sometimes there's a feeling of unity with the cosmos, and it accompanies sense of universal love, similar to metta, and most had no idea what was going to unfold prior to usage. Well, I can say that I'll say this, quoting a teacher of mine. He said that the thing with psychedelics is that you can peek your heads above the clouds and say, yes, there is a pure land, but you never get your boots up there. Use of these kind of chemical skeleton keys can sort of break the veil through the veil, but not really establish you in a penetration of reality. It may shake your naive realism. Is probably the best thing it does. In other words, I don't think anyone gets enlightened from taking chemicals, but they may become less, if they're fortunate and it doesn't screw them up. It may shake up their naive attachment to perceived reality. Should one attach to Nibbana? No, that would be foolishness. There's nothing to attach to. Nibbana is pure non-attachment. Oh, I mean the whole universe, not the observable. Can it be just one sense sphere, or does it include other two spheres as well? Yeah, okay, that's a more interesting question. I'm interpreting what you say that there, for people who are not perhaps not familiar with the idea of the three worlds, that there are three levels of existence seen in Buddhism. Is the sense sphere, which is our world we live in, and also includes everything from the hell realms to the devas. And higher than that or beyond that is the realm of the Brahma gods, called realm of form. And then there's the realm of the formless, which is mind-only beings. And I'm taking this question to be how do we relate this to the known universe? Does it map onto the known universe? And I don't think necessarily it does. That I would say that the observable universe, or the physical universe, would correspond to the sense desire sphere, and the other levels are different planes of reality that are not detectable by our ordinary senses or instruments. That would be my reading of that. Should one attach to kusala, meaning skillfulness or morality? Well, that's still not a perfect view. It's better to attach to kusala than to akusala, but the highest view would be not to attach to anything. A friend wanted to ask this: it's hard to reconcile Mara being from highest Deva realm. How can such deluded being as Mara bring from Kama required to be reborn in highest Deva realm? Yeah, it's quite clear that Mara is born into the highest Deva realm. And there's one sutta where Moggallana has an encounter with Mara, and he actually chastises him for this. How can you, such a refined being as yourself, be behaving so badly? And this is, I think this is an example of the principle of samsara, that beings are constantly rising and falling, that someone would have to have a lot of good merit and karma to be reborn in the Vasawati realm and become Mara. But then he's overcome by the defilement of pride and arrogance, and he imagines himself to be the supreme overlord of the sense desire realm, and he starts causing trouble. And that gives him bad karma, and then he falls down in his subsequent births. Monty, is there a reason for devas and pretas being depicted as humanoid? Are they biologically related somehow, or they don't look like their description at all? Well, pretas are an easier case to deal with. They're reborn humans. They're humans who died and become ghosts, so they retain a humanoid appearance. Devas are a different class of beings, but they are always depicted as anthropomorphic, as human looking. This may be maybe in part just uh, a kind of a prejudice or a presupposition by the ancient people. Just imagining what they might look like. They saw them as perfect humans, but it might also be that the human type or form is a kind of archetypal uh, form or model that we are all reflecting, like humans and devas and brahmas are all different levels of reflection of the same kind of archetypal model, and that they actually do resemble us physically. I kind of suspect that is more likely the case. Doesn't mean that we are reborn only by the law, so to speak, of our own universe and cannot be reborn in a different universe. Um, it would seem this is something I've wondered about, that we don't see in the all the stories that I've come across that involve rebirth. I've never seen any example of rebirth from one world system to another. Beings seem to be always reborn within the same world system. Um, no one seems to be reborn into an adjacent or a different world system. I don't know if we can draw any conclusions from a negative example of just not finding examples. But it would seem that it would seem to make sense in that you have a karmic affinity to the world you're in, and it would be quite a leap to be reborn into another world. If a Sotapanna is reborn in the human realm, are they inevitably be drawn to Buddhism and the Dhamma? Yes, I think so, because they only have 7 lifetimes left, and they will be a stream winner in subsequent births. And there's 2 schools of thought on this. One is that the person begins life immediately; they out of infancy, that they have the realization of a stream winner. They start with it. The other school of thought is that they don't start with that realization, but they're right on the edge, and uh, very early into adulthood, they come across the teachings of the Buddha and very quickly reattain to stream entry. Maybe puny human brain power just can't figure it. Yeah, we're definitely limited in our understanding. This world is I think, much more mysterious and wonderful than we can possibly imagine. There's there's a quote from, I can't remember exactly who it was, one of the modern physicists, one of the quantum mechanical physicists, who said that um, the world is not only stranger than you imagine, but it's stranger than you can possibly imagine. Okay, I think we're running down. We're getting close to an hour, and it looks like the chat is petering out. So I think I'll take my leave. And then next week I'm going to start. I'm going to start a new series. We're going to change tacks and go back to basics. I think I'll do a series on a short series on the Four Noble Truths. Okay. Goodbye, all.